a long-awaited, we've been waiting for 5 years for this publication to appear from Chester Douglas and his co-workers. I've just had a chance to get into that study, and I got to say that that there are some real problems with the Douglas study, not the least of which was in Douglas's case. First of all, he says the conclusion basically that Douglas reaches is that there doesn't seem to be a dose-response effect between fluoride bone levels and the incidence of osteosarcoma. However, he does point out that if the timing of exposure to fluoride is critical, then his study really isn't the right metric for assessing that. Well, Bassin's study was, because that's what Bassin's study did actually. It looked at age-specific exposure to optimally fluoridated water versus non-fluoridated water, and found these odds ratios, that is the increased risk of young boys, especially at the age from 6 to 8, increased risk to osteosarcoma, 400 to 700%, or 4 to 7-fold increase of risk of osteosarcoma in young boys exposed to optimally fluoridated water during the pre-adolescent growth spurt phase. This is a time when long bones are growing at a very high rate, and Bassin's study showed that kids, young boys, exposed at that age had this very significant increase in risk. Now, that's consistent with two other what are called ecological studies done in New Jersey, and in another one done by the National Cancer Institute in Washington and in Iowa, which showed young men being susceptible to increased osteosarcoma risk based on their fluoride exposure. And it's also consistent with an animal study done by the National Toxicology Program showing an increased osteosarcoma rate in male rats but not females. So osteosarcoma being apparently being a sex-linked condition, that's very significant. And what Douglas did in his paper, in addition to admitting that this critical age-specific exposure was not considered in his study, he also points out, it appears to me that what Douglas and his co-workers did was cherry-pick data. For instance, there were 25 cases. I should point out, by the way, that Douglas was the PhD advisor for Elise Bassin. When Elise Bassin published her study, it was Chester Douglas' signature at the bottom of the title page that allowed that thesis to be entered in for completion of Elise Bassin's PhD degree. So these cases that Bassin used were available to Douglas. Nevertheless, when I looked at the Douglas study over the last 2 days, it was just published 3 days ago, there were 25 cases that appeared in Bassin's study that vanished magically from Douglas's study. Now, why did Douglas throw out 25 cases that were available to him through Elise Bassin's work? I want to accuse him of scouring around to find enough data to come up with the conclusions that he was looking for, but I will say the fact that he threw out 25 cases that were available to him and that appeared part of the record in Elise Bassin's thesis is very suspicious. It's very suspicious to me, and I think anyone else who takes a real hard look at that piece of data, at that publication.